At a table worth millions, silence turned into mockery. The female billionaire CEO spoke, but every guest smirked. They claimed they couldn't understand her. Glasses clinked, whispers spread, and her power seemed to vanish in an instant. Then, from the shadows of the room, a young black waitress leaned forward and spoke the one language that changed everything. The dining hall glowed like a palace. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, their light bouncing across golden cutlery and wine glasses worth more than most people's salaries. Every seat around the mahogany table was filled with powerful men in suits, each one trying to outshine the other. Deals worth hundreds of millions were whispered over steak and champagne. At the head of this glittering table sat a woman who didn't belong. At least, that's what the others wanted to believe. Her name was Aiko Tanaka, a self-made billionaire CEO whose company had changed the face of global technology. She wasn't just wealthy. She was history in motion, the only woman and the only outsider at that table of giants. But that night, power is fragile. When Aiko rose to speak, her voice carried both elegance and certainty. Yet, as soon as the first words left her lips, the men exchanged sly glances. Some leaned back in their chairs, others chuckled behind their glasses. "She's impossible to understand," one whispered. "Why bother listening?" "She doesn't belong here," another sneered. The laughter spread like wildfire. What was meant to be a night of historic partnership had turned into a silent trial against the one woman who dared to lead. Aiko's hands trembled under the tablecloth, though she hid it well. Years of building empires, of breaking barriers, of standing where no one believed she could. Yet here, surrounded by wealth and arrogance, she was treated like a stranger at her own victory, and while the room drowned in arrogance, someone else was watching. At the far edge of the hall, almost invisible in her black uniform, Naomi Williams refilled water glasses. She was young, only 24, a waitress who worked double shifts just to keep her younger siblings in school. To the men at the table, she was nothing more than background, a shadow who moved when called. But Naomi's eyes never missed a detail. She saw Aiko's quiet strength. She saw the cruel smirks, and she understood the language that was silencing the billionaire, because Naomi carried a secret. Long before life pulled her into service jobs, she had lived in Japan for nearly a decade. Her late mother had taught English there, and Naomi grew up speaking fluent Japanese. Tonight, while the others mocked, Naomi understood every word Aiko spoke. Clear, powerful, and full of vision. Her heart clenched. Here was a woman who had climbed mountains Naomi could only dream of, being dismissed like a nobody. Naomi's chest burned with conflict. Should she keep her head down and stay invisible? Or step into the fire and reveal what she knew? The clinking of glasses grew louder, the whispers sharper. And Aiko, still standing, still composed, looked smaller with every passing second. Naomi tightened her grip on the jug in her hand. She didn't know it yet, but the choice she made in the next few minutes would not only change the fate of that dinner, it would change her entire life. The laughter in the hall did not fade, it grew sharper, heavier until it felt like a wall pressing against Aiko's chest. Every time she tried to explain her company's vision, her words fell into silence, and silence turned into smirks. One man leaned across the table, his tie loosened, arrogance dripping from his tone. "She should have brought a translator," he chuckled. Another added, "Or maybe she should have stayed home." "This is business, not story hour." The men roared with laughter, and forks scraped against porcelain plates as if mocking her voice. Aiko sat straighter, refusing to let her eyes fall. Her entire life had been built on moments like this, moments when the world tried to push her back into silence. As a child in Osaka, she had been told girls could not lead. As a young entrepreneur, she had been laughed out of boardrooms. Yet each time she had returned stronger, her silence sharper than their mockery. But tonight the wound cut deeper. She had earned her place here with hard work and vision, and still, they treated her as if she were invisible. Naomi's hands shook as she poured water into a glass. She had learned long ago how to disappear in plain sight, how to move so quietly that people forgot she existed. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant survival, but watching Aiko sit at that table, mocked, dismissed, Her words trampled under laughter. Something inside Naomi twisted. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Naomi, language is a bridge. It can build nations. It can heal wounds. Never let anyone tell you your voice doesn't matter. Naomi blinked back tears. She had not spoken Japanese since her mother's funeral years ago. The language carried too much weight, too many memories of a childhood lost and a future she couldn't afford. Yet here, in this room of giants, that same language might be the only rope holding a woman's dignity together. The dinner carried on, cruel and careless. Dishes of caviar and wagyu were placed before the guests. But the food was just a backdrop to their pride. They toasted to themselves, their glasses clashing louder than Aiko's words. "She thinks she's one of us," a man sneered, raising his glass in mock celebration. "But no one here even understands her. How can she possibly lead?" Naomi's heart pounded so loudly she thought the entire room could hear it. She gripped the edge of the table as she stepped forward to collect an empty plate. For the briefest moment her eyes met Aiko's, and in that look Naomi saw something she hadn't expected. Not just pain, not just humiliation, but fire. A quiet, unyielding fire that refused to die, no matter how many voices tried to drown it out. It was the same fire Naomi felt every time she worked a double shift. Every time she chose to put her family's needs before her own dreams. She looked at the men. Their smugness, their certainty that this night belonged to them, and then she looked back at Aiko, the woman who, in her silence, was still stronger than all of them. Naomi knew at that moment, staying silent was no longer an option. Her secret could not stay hidden. Not tonight. The men's laughter rolled on, echoing through the golden hall like thunder. Every chuckle was a dagger, every smirk a stone tossed at Aiko's dignity. Naomi stood at the edge of the table, her hands trembling so violently she almost spilled the jug she carried. Her breath quickened, her heartbeat racing so hard it felt like it might break her ribs. She had been invisible all night, trained to blend into the background. But now her silence felt like betrayal. Her spirit whispered, "If not you, then who? If not now, then when?" She took a step forward. 1, 2. Each step rang louder in her ears than the laughter itself, and then she did the unthinkable. Setting the jug down with a quiet clink, Naomi stepped into the center of the room. She bowed deeply, the way her mother had taught her years ago in Japan. Her hair fell like a curtain around her face, her hands steady at her sides. When she lifted her head, her voice rose, not in English, but in flawless, graceful Japanese. The entire room froze. Forks hovered midair. A glass stopped halfway to someone's lips. Even the chandeliers seemed to pause their glow. "Tanaka-sama," Naomi said, her tone firm yet respectful, "your words are clear. Allow me to carry them to this table, so no one can pretend not to hear you." Aiko's eyes widened, shock flashing across her face, followed quickly by something else, recognition, relief. For the first time that evening, she was not alone. Naomi continued, translating every sentence Aiko had spoken earlier. Her Japanese flowed like water, strong and unbroken. The vision Aiko had laid out of innovation, partnership, and shared success suddenly filled the hall, stripped of mockery. Every investor, every guest now heard her truth in words that could not be twisted. The men who had laughed moments before sat frozen, their smirks collapsing into stunned silence. Some shifted uncomfortably, others avoided her eyes. But Naomi saw it, the fear of men who had lost control of the game they thought they were winning. But Naomi wasn't finished. She looked directly at the man who had mocked the loudest. Her voice didn't waver as she translated his insult back into Japanese, every cruel word, every sneer. She let Aiko hear the disrespect that had been hidden behind false smiles. Gasps rippled through the table. One guest coughed nervously. Another muttered under his breath. The power in the room shifted inch by inch away from the polished suits and toward the two women, one at the head of the table, the other once invisible, now undeniable. Aiko rose again. This time she didn't stand alone. Naomi's voice carried beside hers like twin flames rising against a storm. The laughter was gone. In its place was silence, not the silence of dismissal, but the silence of men who had been caught, stripped bare by truth. Naomi's hands were still shaking, but her heart no longer cowered. She had revealed her secret, and in that moment she was no longer just a waitress. She was a bridge. She was a witness. She was a voice that could not be ignored. And for the first time all night, Aiko's fire burned bright enough to light the entire room. But the battle was not over, because where arrogance is wounded, pride often strikes back harder. And Naomi had just declared war without even knowing it. For a moment, silence reigned in the hall. It was heavy, almost sacred. Aiko's words, reborn through Naomi's voice, still hung in the air like the scent of rain after a storm, but silence never lasts long where wounded pride festers. One of the wealthiest investors, a tall man in a navy suit, leaned back in his chair and forced a laugh. It was sharp, cutting, dripping with arrogance. "So," he said loudly, "we now take lectures from waitresses? What is this? Charity? Do you expect us to trust our millions on the word of a servant?" A few men chuckled nervously, clinging to his arrogance like a shield. Others looked down, unsure which side to take. Naomi's pulse raced. She wanted to shrink, to step back into the shadows, but Aiko's eyes caught hers. The billionaire's gaze was steady, proud, almost commanding. "Stand tall." Before Naomi could reply, another voice joined in, colder and sharper. "Miss Tanaka," said an older man with silver hair, "if you truly had faith in your vision, why would you need a waitress to defend it? Surely a woman of your stature can speak for herself." The insult cut deeper than any blade. They weren't just mocking Aiko's language, they were mocking her worth. Aiko inhaled slowly. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she placed a hand gently on Naomi's shoulder, a silent gesture that spoke louder than words. "We fight together." Naomi's voice rose again, translating the silver-haired man's words back into Japanese, this time with every ounce of contempt they carried. Gasps rippled once more. The cruelty, now unveiled in both tongues, could no longer hide behind polite tones or business smiles. But arrogance is stubborn. The man in navy slammed his hand on the table, rattling silverware. "This dinner is a business negotiation, not a stage for theatrics. If Miss Tanaka can't represent herself, perhaps she should take her ideas back to Tokyo, or the kitchen." The room erupted. Some laughed, others whispered, a few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Naomi's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every word they spoke was a reminder of why she had kept her gift hidden, because to men like this, her voice was nothing more than an inconvenience. Aiko, however, stood taller. Her silence was not weakness, it was strategy. She let Naomi translate every venomous word, every drop of arrogance, so no one could deny the truth of what was happening in that room. Then, finally, she spoke. Her voice, steady, clear, unshaken, cut through the noise like a blade. And with Naomi echoing her in English, her message rang louder than the arrogance, louder than the laughter. "I do not need anyone to speak for me, but I will never silence those who choose to speak with me. The power of my vision lies not in my tongue, but in the courage of those who believe in it. And tonight, you all witnessed courage greater than your wealth can buy." The hall went still again. The men who thought themselves untouchable now found themselves stripped of control. Their weapons, mockery, arrogance, pride, had been turned back on them. But power never surrenders easily, and in the shadows plans were already shifting. Because if Aiko and Naomi had dared to challenge pride once, they would now have to face its revenge. The dinner moved on, but the air was poisoned. Plates were served, wine poured, and music drifted softly from the corner of the hall, but no one tasted or heard a thing. The night had changed. Naomi felt every stare on her back as she moved between tables. She had spoken truth, and truth never comes without a price. The man in the navy suit, the one who had slammed the table, whispered to his neighbor, but loud, enough for her to hear, "She's just a waitress, nothing more." Tonight she acted out of line. People like her should remember their place. A few nodded in agreement. Naomi's throat tightened, but she kept her head high. Still, the whispers grew. "Ambitious servant, attention seeker, unprofessional. Each word sliced through her like glass. For years she had worked in silence, saving every dollar to support her family, never daring to draw attention. And now, her courage had painted a target on her back. One guest, a woman with diamond earrings, sneered as Naomi poured her glass. "Fee, fluent in Japanese, are you? Impressive. But do not mistake parlor tricks for importance. Billionaires sit at this table. You merely serve it." Naomi froze for half a second. Her hand shook, but she refused to let the wine spill. With a calm voice, she replied, "Sometimes those who serve see more clearly than those who sit." The woman scoffed, but Naomi walked away, her words hanging in the air. At the head of the table, Aiko noticed everything. Her sharp gaze tracked every whisper, every sneer, every attempt to tear Naomi down. She knew this world. She had faced these same daggers herself. And yet tonight, it cut deeper, because they weren't just mocking her anymore. They were trying to break the young woman who had stood for her. When dessert was served, the silver-haired man raised his glass. His voice carried across the hall, "To Miss Tanaka's interpreter. May she find more suitable employment, perhaps at a circus where performance is more welcome." Laughter followed. Cruel, sharp, relentless. Naomi felt her face burn, her chest tighten. The humiliation was suffocating. For a moment her courage wavered. Had she gone too far? Should she have stayed silent? But then a sound broke through the laughter. A single clap. Aiko had risen from her chair, her hand steady, her eyes blazing with unshakable pride. She clapped again, slow and deliberate, until the hall fell silent. "This young woman," Aiko declared, her voice echoing against the chandeliers, "did what none of you dared. She listened, she was respected, she bridged worlds you tried to divide. And for that, she deserves not mockery, but honor." The room went silent again, heavy with tension. Some guests looked ashamed, others looked furious. Pride had been challenged once more, and the men who thrived on control were not about to forgive or forget. Naomi stood still, tears pricking her eyes. She had not asked for honor. She had not asked for recognition. All she wanted was to do what was right. But now she was at the center of a storm bigger than she could ever have imagined. And storms, once born, do not die quietly. The night storm had raged long enough. The laughter, the mockery, the whispers, each had tried to bury two women beneath the weight of arrogance. But something stronger had been born in that hall: truth. Naomi stood frozen as Aiko's words washed over her. Honor. The billionaire CEO, the woman everyone had mocked, was now standing openly in her defense. The same men who once sneered now had no choice but to face what courage truly looked like. One by one, the masks of pride began to crack. A younger investor, seated near the end of the table, slowly raised his glass, not to mock, but to support. His voice trembled, but it carried to courage. Another followed, then another. Soon half the table lifted their glasses in respect, not just to Aiko, but to the young black waitress who had dared to speak when the room tried to silence her. The men in navy and silver sat stiff, their eyes burning with unspoken fury. They had lost control of the night. For men who thrived on domination, nothing stung more than being outshined by those they considered beneath them. Naomi, her chest tight with emotion, bowed deeply toward Aiko. Her tears threatened to fall, but she kept her voice steady. "I only did what was right, nothing more." But Aiko shook her head. "No, Naomi, you did what was necessary, and that is what changes the world." The hall erupted in applause, soft at first, then growing until it filled the golden room. Naomi's trembling hands finally steadied. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. She was not just a shadow passing by with a tray. She was a voice, a bridge between worlds, a reminder that courage has no uniform, no title, no bank account. That night, business was not sealed by contracts or signatures. It was sealed by respect. Some investors walked away in anger, unwilling to admit their cruelty. But others stayed, drawn not just to Aiko's vision, but to the humanity behind it. And from those who remained, a partnership was born, one stronger than money alone could buy. As the hall emptied and the chandeliers dimmed, Aiko placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "The world will try to silence you again," she said softly. "But remember this night. Remember how your voice changed everything. Never let them take it from you." Naomi nodded, tears slipping freely now. She knew her life would never be the same. She had stepped into the storm and survived. And though she returned to her small apartment, her long shifts, and the quiet routines of her life, something within her had shifted forever. Because sometimes history does not remember the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it remembers the one who dared to speak when silence was safer. And on that night, in a golden hall filled with wealth and arrogance, it was not the billionaires or the tycoons who carried the greatest power. It was a young black waitress who spoke Japanese and reminded the world that courage needs no permission. If Naomi's bravery and Aiko's strength moved you, don't let this story stay silent. Like, share, and subscribe to witness more stories. Where courage wins, voices are heard, and the overlooked rise to change everything. Your click can inspire someone today.